The sound of the pen gliding on the paper, the signature of Peter Pete Davis in black ink, was the only noise that broke the heavy silence of the living room. The divorce document, a formal testament to a decade of failure, lay between him and Dr. Annie Miller, who looked at him sideways without moving a muscle. The minimalist designed house, with its straight lines and calculated coldness, was a perfect reflection of their relationship, flawless in appearance, but devoid of warmth. Pete felt the oppression of that environment, the weight of invisibility that had led him to make that decision. His creativity, once a source of joy and purpose, had been suffocated by his wife's and her family's ambition. The wedding ring, a gold circle he considered a burden, seemed to burn on his finger. The coldness of Annie, her inability to emotionally connect, had turned the love he once felt into a bitter resignation. He expected a conflict, an argument, but her silence was her cruelest response. A cold acceptance that confirmed his decision was the only way. Annie, the renowned neurosurgeon, the Iron Surgeon, didn't even look at the papers. Her eyes, which in the operating room were capable of unraveling the most complex secrets of the human brain, were fixed on a distant point. Control was her currency, her armor against vulnerability. Pete's divorce was just another variable in a success equation she refused to let unbalance. She, who could decide on life and death, could not allow a mundane emotion like sadness to affect her. The cold facade she had meticulously built was her only way of survival. However, the universe seemed to have other plans. The ring of her cell phone, a jarring melody breaking the quietness, pulled her out of her trance. It was the hospital. The voice on the other end, urgent and formal, asked her to go to her own office for a meeting. The urgency in the tone, the formal address, something she, in her position, never received, sent a shiver down her spine. The diagnosis of a rare and fatal degenerative brain disease, which she, in her expertise, immediately recognized as a death sentence, hit her like a lightning bolt. The universe that she, with her logic, tried to control, crumbled in an instant. Back at home, Annie's mind was a battlefield. The diagnosis, a diagnosis she herself had given to others, put her in the role of a patient, of being vulnerable. She tried to cling to logic, to rationality, but the doctor's voice echoed in her head. Her first instinct, an instinct for self-protection, was to hide. Hide from everyone, from her family, from her colleagues, especially from Pete, the man she was about to lose and for whom weakness was a sign of failure. She, the Iron Surgeon, could not be weak. Pete, however, noticed the change. Annie's coldness, once a predictable pattern, now seemed to have a new layer. He noticed the paleness of her face, the subtle tremor in her hands, the lost look she tried to disguise. He saw her stumble on a stair-step, a miscalculation she would never make. He tried to approach her, his concern disguised as a casual comment. "Are you okay, Anna?" he asked, his voice soft. She, however, dodged him. "I'm perfectly fine, Peter. What do you think would be wrong with me?" she replied, with her usual coldness. A mask she tightened even more forcefully, trying to hide the truth that her world was falling apart, and that she, the brilliant surgeon, could do nothing to stop. The main conflict, the divorce, was momentarily forgotten. In its place, a new tension settled in, a silent and painful tension. Pete, frustrated by her resistance, but with his protective instinct sharpened, began to watch her closely. He noticed the model of one of his old projects, a lighthouse, that she had knocked off the shelf without him noticing. A model that symbolized hope and direction, now broken on the floor, like the fragments of her own life. The scene was a glimpse of the chaos that had settled within her. Annie, in turn, tried to maintain her routine at all costs, as if the stability of her schedule could ward off the imminence of death. But the symptoms were relentless. The small memory lapses, the strange pauses in her speeches, the difficulty concentrating, all terrified her. In a moment of relief, a subtle flashback hit her. The image of a young, idealistic Peter, his eyes shining as he talked about architecture in an old woodworking shop. That was the Peter she loved. The Peter who made her laugh. The Peter who saw her not as the iron surgeon, but as the vulnerable Ana Luisa she had buried long ago. The memory, fleeting and painful, made her feel a pang of longing for a life she herself had destroyed. Pete's request for divorce became, for Annie, a confirmation of her loss. She had pushed him away, had turned him into a stranger in his own home. She felt guilty, but the shame of her illness prevented her from confessing. She, the surgeon who saved lives, could not save her own. Pete, in his architecture office, a creative and chaotic environment that reflected his essence, looked at a drawing of a simple house with large windows and a garden, a project he had designed for him and Annie, but that he never had the courage to show her. The drawing was a symbol of a life they never had, a life he still secretly desired, a life he was about to seek alone. He, who was about to sign his freedom, found himself trapped in a new reality, a reality in which the woman he loved, even with the pain of distance, was suffering in silence. His passivity, once a form of protection, became an unbearable weight. He knew he couldn't leave her. Not now. He needed answers. Their fight was just beginning, not against the divorce, but against the imminence of a loss that threatened to erase all traces of a love he once felt, and that, secretly, he still felt. The first clue to her secret, the personal trauma she had repressed her whole life, was about to be revealed. Peter's look at the divorce documents was different. The words "final judgment," which once represented his freedom, now seemed like a certificate of cowardice. The image of Annie crying and the small memory lapses he had observed weighed on his conscience. He, who was about to walk away, felt his protective instinct, dormant for years, reignite with an overwhelming force. He would not sign those papers. Instead, he decided to look for answers. He followed her discreetly to the hospital. From afar, he watched her talking with a colleague, Dr. Marcus, a man he had never liked, but who was Annie's confidant at work. Her face was pale, and her hand trembled as she leaned against the wall. The scene was an echo of that night in their kitchen. He saw the despair and panic in her eyes and knew the disease was real. The emotional distance that separated them crumbled in an instant, giving way to an urgency he hadn't felt in a long time. Pete approached Annie in her office, the divorce papers in his hands. She looked at him, frightened, as if he were a ghost from her past. He put the papers on her desk, took the divorce ring from his finger, and placed it on the table beside them. "I'm not going to sign." "What's happening to you, Anna?" he asked, his voice firm, but with a gentleness she recognized, and that for an instant made her waver. Annie, in a desperate attempt to maintain control, tried to lie, tried to defend herself, but the words simply wouldn't come out. She felt humiliated, exposed. Shame and fear, feelings she had repressed her whole life, consumed her. Her iron armor, her facade as an unshakable surgeon, finally crumbled. She cried, a silent and painful cry, and the confession, the truth of the degenerative disease, came amidst the tears. Pete, instead of recoiling, embraced her, a hug that she, in her life of control and coldness, had avoided for years. A hug that, for an instant, made her feel safe. He became her confidant, her caregiver, her external memory. He helped her organize her notes, remember her appointments, and fight against time that seemed to be running faster than ever. The minimalist house, once cold, began to fill with warmth, affection, and a new life that arose from the imminence of death. Together, they revisited the past. Pete took her to an old woodworking shop where he had worked on his first projects. He made her touch the wood, feel the texture, and remember the details of a time when their dreams were more important than their careers. That place, which once symbolized Pete's lost passion, was now the scene of a deep reconnection. In a moment of relief, a subtle flashback hit her. The image of a young Pete teaching her to sand a piece of wood with the gentle smile she had loved so much. The memory, fleeting but real, made her feel a pang of longing for a life she had sacrificed. She looked at Pete, and in one of her rare moments of vulnerability said, "I remember you. Remember us." The words, simple and sincere, were the first bridge they built to reconnect their hearts. He took her to a small art gallery, a place they used to visit when they were dating. The paintings, the sculptures, the artists, everything there seemed to have a new meaning. They talked for hours, not about the divorce, but about life, art, and the beauty that they, in their pursuit of success, had forgotten to appreciate. Dr. Marcus, Annie's colleague, however, did not look favorably on their reconciliation. He, who secretly loved her, was jealous of the intimacy that was growing between the couple. He subtly tried to take advantage of the situation, insinuating that Annie's illness was a burden that Pete would not be able to handle, an insinuation that made her feel ashamed. Annie's family, in turn, disapproved of the reconciliation. They, who had built their daughter's reputation on success and control, saw her vulnerability as a weakness. They wanted her to be treated in the best hospitals in the world, but Pete, with his kindness and determination, wanted her to live her last moments with dignity and love. The conflict between the sterile world of the hospital and the real world of life became Pete's new battlefield. The memory box, a box Annie kept in her closet, became Pete's tool to help her retain her memories. He opened it, and with each object, a new layer of their history was revealed. An old map from a trip they took together, a photo of them in an old workshop, a ticket to a music show he had taken her to. Each object was a piece of the puzzle of a love he had hidden and that she had forgotten. In a moment of fragility, Annie found a drawing, a model of a house with a garden, the model Pete had designed for them. The sight of the house, of the life they could have had, made her cry. She looked at Pete and in a moment of clarity said, "Peter, I love you." The words, a rare and precious gift, were the confirmation that their love, despite the distance, was still alive. Their fight was not just against the disease, but against time, against forgetting. They fought to preserve memories, to fill emotional gaps, to rebuild a life that they, in their pursuit of success, had allowed to fall apart. Their love, which was revealed in the imminence of loss, was a love that healed, that forgave, that united two souls who had lost themselves in their own worlds. The wedding ring, once a symbol of ostentation for Annie and a burden for Pete, became a symbol of true love. Pete put it back on her finger, and she accepted it, with tears streaming down her face, a gesture of a new commitment, of a new beginning. Dr. Marcus, Annie's colleague, did not give up his advances. In an attempt to separate the couple, he tried to convince Annie to seek treatment at another hospital, a hospital he controlled. He tried to manipulate her family, using her illness as a pretext to get closer. But Pete, with his new voice and his new strength, confronted him. "Anna doesn't need a doctor. She needs a husband," he said, his voice firm, the voice of a man who had finally regained control of his life. Annie's health deteriorated significantly. The memory gaps became more frequent, and she began to get lost in her own memories. Her family, frightened, tried to take her away, but Pete, with the help of a lawyer, fought for her. He fought for Annie's right to have dignity, the right to choose her own death. The conflict between science and humanity, between the cold world of the hospital and the warm world of love, became Pete's new battlefield. The climax of the second act was a major crisis, in which Annie, in a moment of confusion, mistook Pete for her brother, a brother she had lost in childhood, and who was the real reason for her pursuit of neurosurgery. The revelation of the second secret, the personal trauma she had repressed her whole life, set her free. The second secret, the reason behind their marriage, was also revealed. Pete, in fact, married her to protect her from a family scandal, a scandal that would destroy her. He married her for love, for sacrifice, a love that she, in her pursuit of success, had forgotten. The truth, which was hidden in a box of secrets, finally came to light. Their love, which seemed to have died, was reborn amidst the disease, amidst the imminence of death. Pete, the idealistic architect, and Annie, the iron surgeon, came together to face the invisible enemy, the disease, that threatened to erase all traces of her memory and of their love. Their fight was no longer for life, but for dignity, for the right to love and be loved in her last moments. The revelation of Annie's trauma and the truth behind her marriage to Pete changed everything. The weight of shame and fear she had carried her whole life was replaced by a painful clarity and an acceptance that set her free. She was not just a declining neurosurgeon. She was a woman loved, protected, and understood by a man who sacrificed his own happiness for her sake. The armor, once a symbol of her strength, became a memory of her distant past. Pete, in turn, felt a freedom that divorce could never give him. The secret he had kept for years, the reason behind their marriage and his protective passivity, finally came to light. He was no longer the frustrated and resigned man. He was the man who chose to love and protect, a man with a clear purpose and a recovered voice, fighting not for himself, but for the dignity of the woman he had loved his whole life. They confronted the reality of the disease. The fight was no longer for a cure, but for dignity. Pete used his creativity not to build buildings, but to design a life of dignity for his wife. He drew a plan, a life routine that preserved Annie's memories, a routine that made her feel loved, safe, and at peace. The model of the house with the garden, the project he had designed for them, became the symbol of their love. They built it, not with bricks, but with memories. He took her to the garden so she could smell the flowers, and he made her listen to the music they loved so the melody could fill the gaps in her memory. They remarried, this time by choice, for love, for a commitment that was stronger than disease and time. The ceremony, simple and intimate, took place in the garden of the house they built with their memories. The wedding ring, once a symbol of ostentation and burden, became a symbol of true love and a new commitment, a promise to love and honor each other until the end. The light and shadow of their story mixed in a scenario of hope. The cold, clinical lighting of the hospital, which represented Annie's past life, was replaced by the warm, natural light of her home garden, which represented her new life, her acceptance of emotion and vulnerability. Death, which was once an enemy, became a reminder of the beauty of life, of the importance of loving and living fully. Annie's family, who had disapproved of the reconciliation, surrendered to the strength of their love. They, who had judged Annie's weakness, now admired her courage. And Dr. Marcus, who had tried to take advantage of the situation, walked away, ashamed, leaving the couple in peace. Pete, in his architecture office, a creative and chaotic environment that now reflected his essence, returned to work on his projects, but with a new purpose. He didn't just build buildings, he built dreams, hope, life, and his passion and purpose, which he had lost, were rediscovered in the process of loving and caring for the woman he never stopped loving. Annie, in her last moments, was no longer the iron surgeon, but the vulnerable and loved Ana Luisa. She remembered the smell of the flowers, the sound of the songs, the touch of Pete on her hands. Her memories, which were fading, were replaced by the love she felt for Pete, a love that was stronger than disease and time. The story ends with the celebration of the life they built. They accepted the beauty of imperfection and the importance of living and loving fully, even if time was limited. Their story, a love revealed in the imminence of loss, became their last and most beautiful work. The last trace of her memory, a trace of love was the remembrance of Pete, her husband, her protector, her love. The last sound she heard was his voice saying, "I love you, Anna." Their love, which was revealed amidst death, became immortal. The sunlight set on the horizon, illuminating the garden of their home, a garden that was a testament to their love. Their love, which seemed to have died, was reborn amidst the disease, amidst the imminence of loss. The final drawing of their lives, though incomplete, was a work of art, a love story that would be told forever. The story ends with the image of Pete in his architecture office, looking at the drawing of the house they built with their memories. He smiled, a smile of peace and acceptance, and in a gesture of love, he kept it like a treasure, the final proof of the love of his life.